They came with guns drawn. 3 police cars, sirens screaming up the dirt road, all because I was sipping coffee on my porch. I hadn't done anything. I wasn't trespassing, I wasn't building illegally, and I wasn't disturbing anyone. But Victoria Sterling, the woman who thought running an HOA meant ruling a kingdom, had dialed 911 anyway. To her, my family cabin was a threat to property values. She live-streamed the whole thing to her followers like she was capturing a criminal in the act. And in a way, she was. Just not the one she thought. That day wasn't the beginning. Not really. But it was the moment that made me realize something much darker was happening in Sterling Heights. I stood there quietly as the officers approached, their hands tense near their weapons. "We've received a report of a suspicious person illegally occupying land," one of them said, not even trying to hide his exhaustion. I handed him the deed to the cabin. Yellowed edges, my grandfather's signature at the bottom, notarized, and legal since 1962. The officer nodded. "You're good, sir. This land's not under HOA jurisdiction." Victoria turned pale, and in that moment, I saw it. Not confusion or frustration. Fear. She wasn't trying to protect the neighborhood. She was trying to protect something else, something she couldn't afford for me to uncover. My name is Marcus Thompson, and until that morning, I thought I just owned a quiet cabin in the woods. But what Victoria didn't know, what even I didn't fully realize, was that I owned everything, Sterling Heights. The golf courses, her mansion, every paved road and manicured lawn built on that land, all of it sat on a 99-year lease. And that lease, it was about to expire. But we weren't there yet. First came the storm. I'd inherited the cabin after my parents died in a car accident when I was 25. It was built by my grandfather with his own 2 hands. No electricity, no cell service, just pure peace. When I wasn't managing my restaurant business across Colorado, I was here, regrouping, breathing. That Saturday morning started like any other. Sunlight spilling over Pine Ridge Valley, coffee in hand, birds chirping. Then came the Range Rover. Out. Stepped Victoria Sterling, pearls, clipboard, measuring tape, and 2 silent HOA board members at her side like a personal militia. "This structure," she said, waving her clipboard, "violates 23 HOA codes. Grass height, paint tone, reflective window angles." I laughed. I actually laughed. "Ma'am, this cabin predates your HOA by 50 years. I'm not even part of Sterling Heights." She didn't flinch. "Everything within 10 miles of our subdivision falls under community appearance standards." It was ridiculous. But not to her. Victoria lived for rules, not to keep order, but to keep control. Everyone in Sterling Heights knew it. Harold Crawford, my elderly neighbor, joked that Victoria had 911 on speed dial and probably sent cookies to the dispatcher. She once called the cops because someone's garden gnome didn't match the neighborhood color palette. So it wasn't a surprise when, minutes later, she was screaming into her phone, reporting me as an armed squatter threatening her safety. 3. Squad cars, officers with weapons. A live stream titled "Cabin Criminal Caught." Her performance was award-worthy. But when the officers saw my paperwork, and the cabin that had stood untouched since Kennedy was president, the performance fell apart. Victoria trembled. "This is not over," she hissed as they drove. Off. "I'll use every legal means to destroy that shack." But as she turned to leave, Emma Brooks caught my eye. A mother from the HOA board. Nervous. Hesitant. "Meet me tomorrow," she whispered. "At the coffee shop. She's hiding something dangerous." I didn't know what Emma meant yet, but I could feel it. This wasn't about property codes or grass height. Victoria had an empire to protect, and she'd burn everything to the ground to keep it hidden. By Monday, the harassment escalated. A certified letter arrived with 30 alleged violations. One day later, a letter from her husband, Richard Sterling, HOA lawyer and enforcer, threatening a $300,000 lawsuit for emotional distress. I laughed again, but not as freely this time, because then the rumors started. Victoria took to the Sterling Heights social group, 15,000 members, and posted that I was a fugitive, a squatter, a financial predator. Neighbors from my restaurant stopped looking. Me in the eye. That's when I called Elena Rodriguez, real estate attorney, tough as nails. She'd battled HOAs before and lived to tell the tale. "This isn't just harassment," she said, flipping through the letters. "It's orchestrated and illegal. But Marcus, I think there's something deeper here. Let me dig into the land records." While she worked, Victoria turned up the heat. She led a protest. 30 residents carrying signs. "Protect property values. Tear down the shack." She live-streamed again, laser measuring my porch and shouting about code violations. 47? She screamed. 47 violations. I sipped coffee and called out, "You ever try knitting, Victoria? Might be less stressful than threatening innocent cabins." She seethed, but I wasn't laughing anymore. Emma met me again that night. Pale, eyes darting. She slid a phone across the table. Photos, screenshots. "They've been raising our HOA fees by 300%. They're laundering money, millions." I stared. "Victoria knows your land is valuable. She mentioned your grandfather at the board meeting. Said she'd make sure you were gone before any lease expires." That night, I pulled out a box of old letters my grandfather had left behind, and there it was, a single note from 1965. "One day, this will be worth a fortune. I'm keeping the details hidden until the time is right." I didn't sleep that night, because the time had come, and Victoria Sterling had no idea who she'd just declared war on. The envelope arrived before dawn, no return address, just a single name printed in clean block letters, Marcus Thompson. Inside was a photo, black and white, grainy, but unmistakable. My grandfather standing beside a man in a suit I didn't recognize, shaking hands over what looked like a contract, the mountains of Pine Ridge rising faintly in the background. On the back, a scrawled note in my grandfather's handwriting, "Lease 1929, don't trust the Sterlings." I stared at the words as the sun rose over the valley. My hands trembled. Somewhere, somehow, this fight had become generational. I didn't even know what I was standing on anymore, but I was beginning to realize that the land beneath my feet held a history far more explosive than I could have imagined. Later that morning, Elena called. Her voice cracked through the phone like lightning. "Marcus, stop everything. Get to my office now. I found it." "Found what?" I didn't ask. I didn't need to. I just drove. When I arrived, she locked the door behind me and pulled out a massive file from her desk drawer. "Your grandfather," she whispered, "didn't just own that cabin. He bought the entire Pine Ridge Valley." My mouth went dry. "How much land?" 15,000 acres, she said. "All of it leased. All of it due to revert back to you in 18 months, including Sterling Heights." I stood frozen. As the room spun around me, Elena spread out maps, land records, lease agreements, all notarized and stamped. "It's all real, and there's more. Your grandfather structured the leases so that if any tenant harassed or endangered the landholder, the lease could be terminated early, immediately." I laughed once, a wild, disbelieving sound. Victoria Sterling had walked straight into a legal landmine, but it wasn't over. Not even close, because by then, Victoria had already started her next move, and this one was personal. That same afternoon, she released a video titled, "Exposing Marcus Thompson, From Bankruptcy to Squatter." 80,000 views in 2 days. She weaponized my past, the bankruptcy I filed after losing my parents, after drowning in funeral bills and hospital fees. "Do we want someone like this owning land near our children?" she asked in the video. He couldn't manage his own life. Now he wants to manage ours? I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Then came the vandalism, spray paint across my cabin. "Get out. Die, squatter scum. You don't belong." Someone threw a rock through the window and burned my grandfather's old rocking chair. That broke me. It wasn't just a piece of furniture. He had built that chair by hand for my grandmother after she lost her legs to illness. He used to sit there reading her stories by firelight. Now it was ash. Victoria laughed about it during a live stream. called it a necessary cleansing of blight. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to fight. But I didn't. Instead, I called Emma. Come to the cabin. Tonight. Bring everything you have. She arrived with a single USB drive. This is it, she whispered. Proof of $8 million embezzled. 3 fake companies. Money laundered through shell developments. She paused. She's going to kill you, Marcus. If she finds out what I've done, she already knows, I said. Quietly. This ends now. We met the next morning with Harold Crawford, my old neighbor, a retired journalist, in a diner on the edge of town. He brought a rusty metal box. Your grandfather gave me this 40 years ago, he said. Told me to give it to you when things got bad. Inside were original maps, contracts, even aerial photos, showing the land before development, handwritten across one document in red ink. Sterling Heights built on borrowed time. That night, I barely slept. At 2 a.m., I heard footsteps. I stepped outside and froze. 6 men dressed in black were circling my cabin. One held a crowbar. Another carried a can of gasoline. They weren't here to protest. They were here to end it. I slid into the trees, hiding as they broke down my door and began trashing the interior. I could hear Victoria's voice through a phone speaker. She was live streaming again. This is what happens, she crowed, when someone challenges the natural order. Marcus Thompson is a disease and we are the cure. One man hesitated. Lady, this is arson. I'll pay you enough to forget that concern, she snapped. They smashed photos, tore open drawers, set fire to the porch, and then they found the rocking chair's ashes. Burn it all, Victoria whispered through the speaker. Make sure there's nothing left. When they finally drove off, I crept back toward the wreckage. My hands were shaking, but inside the ruined walls something caught my eye. A letter, crumpled but unburned, fallen from Victoria's handbag during the chaos. It was from her daughter. Mom, I can't see you anymore. You need help. Please stop contacting us. We're scared of you. I still have nightmares about disappointing you. Please get help. Her daughter, her own child. The woman who had tried to crush my life had lost her own family years before, replaced them with a twisted obsession for control. And suddenly, I didn't feel hate. I felt pity, but that pity didn't change anything. She'd crossed a line, and now it was time for war. Elena met me early the next morning, her arms full of documents. We found the clause. If the leaseholder engages in criminal activity against the landowner, the lease can be terminated immediately. No waiting for 2028. She paused. You can take it all back now, Marcus. Today. I nodded once. It was time. Victoria didn't wait for court. She showed up that afternoon at my hotel with Richard, 2 lawyers, and a smug grin. Let's make this simple, she purred. Sign over the cabin. We'll drop the lawsuits. Here's $50,000 for your trouble. When I said no, her smile turned venomous. You don't understand what you're dealing with, she hissed. Your restaurants will fail. Your loans will vanish. I have connections everywhere. I've destroyed bigger men than you. What she didn't know was that Emma had been recording from the hallway. And 5 minutes later, Elena had sent the audio to federal investigators. The dominoes were starting to fall. But Victoria wasn't done. She pulled her final card. A construction excavator, rented in her name, came crawling up the mountain, massive and loud. She was behind the controls herself. If the law won't help, she screamed, I'll restore order with my own hands. The live stream numbers exploded. 100,000 people watching. I'm giving you 5 seconds, Marcus, she shouted. Move or be crushed. And that's when we heard it. Sirens. Not from local cops. Black SUVs roared up the road. Federal vehicles. FBI agents. They surrounded the machine in seconds, weapons drawn. Victoria Sterling. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker. Shut off that excavator. You are under federal investigation. The crowd fell silent. Mr. Thompson, the agent, continued, Our records confirm you are the legal owner of all 15,000 acres of Pine Ridge Valley, including the land Sterling Heights is built on. Gasps, screams, someone fainted. And then, I reported the fraud months ago, Emma said, stepping forward with documents. She stole from all of us, and I have proof. Victoria froze. It was over. Not just for her, but for everything she built. The crowd that had once supported her now turned. Someone yelled, "What happens to our homes?" Another, "We've been paying criminals." Elena stepped forward, calm but commanding. "Mr. Thompson owns this land, but he's not here to punish you. Only those who helped destroy lives." Then she turned to Victoria. "And as for you," FBI agents swarmed. "Victoria Sterling, you're under arrest for embezzlement, assault, and attempted murder." As they dragged her from the cab of the excavator, she screamed, "I already sold the development rights. I signed the contracts. You can't stop it." But the FBI agent only smiled. "Thanks for the confession," he said. "That makes our job even easier." And with that, the empire of Victoria Sterling, queen of the HOA, came crashing down. But for me, this was only the middle. Because now that I knew what I truly owned, the real battle was about to begin. I stood there surrounded by smoke, sirens, and stunned faces, while Victoria Sterling screamed from inside a pair of FBI handcuffs. "You can't do this!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with rage. "This land is mine! I already sold the development rights. Check your email, Marcus. You'll see." The wind carried her words like poison across the valley. The very same land she had tried to crush beneath an excavator just moments earlier. But now the crowd wasn't with her. Now they were turning. The same people who had once protested outside my cabin, who had cheered as she threatened me with legal ruin and physical harm, now looked like they'd woken from a dream or a nightmare. And as their eyes met mine, I saw something new. Not just fear, but shame. "What does this mean for our homes?" One man yelled, his voice panicked. "Are we all getting evicted?" A woman sobbed, holding a toddler to her chest. I didn't answer right away. I looked out at the chaos and confusion, at the broken trust, at the terrified families who had just realized the truth. Their HOA president was a criminal, and the land their lives were built on belonged to the man they had tried to drive out. I turned to Elena. She gave a small nod. It was time to speak. Stepped forward, took the portable microphone from the FBI agent's hand, and let my voice rise through the still thick air. "Let me be very clear. Silence. You've all been through hell. Lied to, manipulated, stolen from. I'm not here to make that worse." Some in the crowd exhaled. Others waited, suspicious. For those of you who were innocent in all this, those who just wanted to live peacefully, who paid your dues and followed the rules, who were used by Victoria and Richard, your leases will remain intact. I'll offer fair 50-year renewals at the same rates. A few gasps of relief. Some people started to cry. But I continued, and this time my voice hardened. For those who participated in the harassment, the destruction of my cabin, the smear campaign, the threats, that's a different story. I turned slowly, letting my gaze land on the 47 who had signed the petition to ban Marcus Thompson from civilized areas. The ones who'd stood outside my grandfather's cabin with torches and megaphones, who had laughed while Victoria tried to erase my family's legacy. "You have two choices," I said. "One, accept a 400% increase in your lease rate. Or two, vacate your property within 30 days, the crowd murmured. A man near the front, red-faced and trembling, shouted, "That's not fair. We were just following HOA rules." I looked straight at him. "You spray-painted death threats on a family cabin. You stood by while a woman tried to run me over with construction equipment. You don't get to cry foul now." No one else objected. Victoria, still restrained, shouted something unintelligible as agents loaded her into the back of an SUV. Richard, standing beside his crumbling kingdom, was pale and silent, until someone asked the question that had been hanging over all of us since the FBI's arrival. "What about the development deal?" "The mall?" Everyone turned toward me. I didn't need to answer. Elena held up her phone and stepped beside me. "The development deal Victoria bragged about?" she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Completely fraudulent. You can't..." Sell rights to land you don't own. Wellington Corporation already confirmed that her contract is void. In fact, they've initiated legal action against her for fraud. The crowd erupted, a mixture of cheers, relief, and stunned laughter. But I wasn't done. "There's more," I said. "My great-grandfather built this lease system to preserve this valley, to balance growth with stewardship. And that's exactly what I intend to do." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter, the original deed, handwritten in 1928. "This document," I said, holding it up, "proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Pine Ridge Valley was purchased for conservation, that Sterling Heights and every other neighborhood here exists only because of a lease that ends in 18 months, or earlier if broken." I looked out at the sea of faces, many now humbled, some tearful. "I'm not your enemy," I said, "but I am the owner of this land, and I won't let what happened here ever happen again." The meeting broke. Some came to shake my hand, to thank me. Others avoided my gaze, but the story was far from over. That night, I sat at the rebuilt cabin, the one my contractor friends had rushed to restore in 3 days, just to give me something to hold on to, and stared at a glowing laptop screen. An email had arrived. Subject: "The real owner of Pine Ridge," from unknown senderencryptedmail.com. I hesitated. Then clicked, attached, a deed transfer, dated 1928. It suggested my grandfather might not have been the original buyer. For a terrifying moment, my breath stopped. Was Victoria right? But as I read on, the panic faded. The document confirmed it. My great-grandfather, Thomas Thompson, had bought the land directly from the state of Colorado for community conservation. He had passed it to my grandfather, who structured the leases with specific protections and moral clauses. It wasn't just legal. It was legacy. "This," Elena whispered, reading over my shoulder, "is a gift. No one could ever challenge my claim again." The next morning, we held an emergency town hall in the community center. The room was packed. Over 2,000 people. Federal. Judges had already reviewed everything, and the news was official. I owned not just the land, but by law, the structures on it. That meant Victoria Sterling's $5 million mansion was mine. Richard Sterling's law office? Mine. Even the gaudy HOA headquarters where they had plotted everyone's financial ruin? Mine. The backlash was immediate. Panic. Screaming. Phones lighting up across the room. Some people called lawyers. Others called real estate agents. A few just sat in shock. I waited until it quieted. Then I stood. "You have nothing to fear," I said again, "unless you were part of the corruption, the harassment, the hate." I paused, looked straight at the 47 again. "For you, your days here are numbered." Then I turned to Victoria, now in custody at the edge of the room, hair unkempt, designer clothes wrinkled and stained, wrists bound. "Your mansion will be demolished brick by brick, and the land returned to the forest." She lunged. Broke. Free from the guards and screamed, "I am the queen! This is my kingdom!" She pulled a knife from her purse. Chaos erupted. But before she could take a step, 3 FBI agents tackled her to the ground. Even then, she kept screaming, "You don't understand. I signed the deal. I already sold it all. Marcus owns nothing." But she was wrong. I owned everything. And now it was time to rebuild. Emma Brooks was sworn in as the new community manager. Her daughter, Sophie, stood by her side, beaming with pride. I announced the creation of the Thomas Thompson Memorial Trust, 10,000 acres of Pine Ridge permanently designated as nature preserve. No development, no sale, protected forever. The other 5,000 would be managed sustainably, with affordable housing, education funding, and conservation support built into every lease. I slashed lease rates by 40% for all residents who had been victims of Victoria's schemes. And for the rest? They could leave or pay. As for Victoria and Richard, they would soon face a trial that would become national news. But standing there, on the steps of the community center, surrounded by families finally breathing freely again, I realized something deeper. This wasn't just about one corrupt woman. It was about the people who let her rule, the silence that fed her power, the rules that protected the wrong things. So I made a promise, to my grandfather, to this valley, and to every quiet, terrified homeowner across the country, never again. Justice, when it finally came, wore an orange jumpsuit and stared down the barrel of a camera lens. Victoria Sterling, former queen of the HOA, woman of pearls and rules and rage, now sat on a plastic chair in a federal prison, her hair graying at the roots, makeup smeared under her eyes, and her once authoritative voice reduced to trembling, rehearsed apologies. "This is a court-ordered statement," she read, blinking under the harsh lighting. "I admit to embezzling $8 million from the Sterling Heights HOA, to harassing residents, and to attempting to destroy private property owned by Marcus Thompson." She hesitated, swallowed, then said the words she had once screamed in defiance. "Was wrong." The video was uploaded to the HOA's former YouTube page, which Emma had reclaimed after the federal seizure of assets. Within 24 hours, it had over 500,000 views. The comments were brutal. HOA Karen finally got her karma. This is what happens when you let a narcissist run your neighborhood. That poor man. She tried to kill him. I cried when she burned the rocking chair. I hope she rots. But the most heartbreaking comment came from someone who claimed to be her daughter. You chose power over love. Again. Victoria was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, convicted on charges of embezzlement, aggravated assault, and attempted murder. The judge called her a manipulative and dangerous individual who built an empire on fear and fraud. And Richard, he tried to flip. He sat down with prosecutors and spilled everything: the shell companies, the fake development plans, the targeted harassment campaigns, even the forged documents Victoria had signed in his name. But it was too late. The FBI had everything already: Emma's files, the audio recordings, the live streams, the financial trails. Richard Sterling was sentenced to 5 years and fined $2 million. His law license was stripped, his reputation erased. I didn't attend their sentencing hearings. I didn't need to, because by then I was too focused on building what they tried to destroy. The Thomas Thompson Memorial Trust was finalized 2 weeks later. We designated 10,000 acres of Pine Ridge Valley as permanently protected wilderness. No development, no sales, no exploitation. A gift to Colorado, just as my great-grandfather intended. The other 5,000 acres, managed through fair use leasing with sustainability clauses and an education fund built directly into the structure. Emma helped lead the charge. Her first official act as the new community manager was demolishing the gaudy Sterling Heights HOA headquarters. A building that once hosted corruption, threats, and phony fee increase parties was torn down brick by brick. We saved one brick and mounted it to a plaque in the new community garden. Never again. And we meant it. The 47 people who had actively supported Victoria's reign, including Bradley, the man who threw paint on my cabin, were given their deadline: pay the quadruple lease rate or leave. Most of them left. Bradley came to see me one morning. He looked older, humbled. "I wanted to apologize," he said, staring at the ground. "I was scared. I thought if I didn't side with her, she'd come after me next." I didn't say anything. Just let the silence sit. "I helped destroy your home, and I'm sorry." I studied him for a long time, then said the only thing I could: then go rebuild something that matters. Others weren't so remorseful. Mrs. Davidson, who once shouted that I should be removed like a disease, cried as she packed up her SUV. "We have nowhere to go," she pleaded. Elena was there, calm, steady. "You participated in an attempted murder. You're lucky you're not in prison." Pine Ridge was healing, but we weren't forgetting. Because forgetting is how people like Victoria come to power in the first place. To help protect the next generation, we created something new: the National HOA Abuse Victims Fund. Seeded with restitution money from Victoria's seized assets, the fund was designed to support homeowners across the country who were trapped under tyrannical HOA boards. Legal aid, relocation support, whistleblower protections, real help for real people. We got hundreds of letters within days. One stood out, a handwritten note from a veteran in Texas. "They fined me for flying the American flag. Your story gave me the courage to fight back. Thank you. That one made me cry. But the most beautiful change wasn't on paper or in courtrooms, it was in the people. Emma, now thriving in her new role, turned Victoria's old wine and sign racket into community night markets. The Johnsons, who nearly lost their home, now sold homemade jam and produced from the new garden. The Patel twins, who had dropped out of college due to sudden fee restructuring, were awarded full scholarships from the new Pine Ridge Education Trust. They came by my cabin one evening to say thank you. We're going to study environmental law, one of them said, because of what you did. I didn't have words for that. And then there was Sophie, 10 years old, wild brown curls, eyes full of fire. The night Emma brought her to the rebuilt cabin, rebuilt by local contractors who volunteered time and labor, we sat on the porch as the stars came out. Why did you protect this place? Sophie asked me, legs swinging from the bench. Looked around, at the trees, the hills, the soil soaked in memory and legacy. Because land isn't just dirt, I said quietly. It's the stories we build on it, the people we fight for, the promises we keep. She thought about that for a long time, then nodded solemnly. Like my mom. I looked at Emma. She was crying softly. Yes, I said. Exactly like your mom. Emma helped oversee a dozen community projects that month, including tearing down Victoria's mansion. We turned the demolition into a community event. Neighbors brought sledgehammers, goggles, and gloves. One by one, they took turns smashing the walls that once hid corruption and intimidation. We kept one final relic, Victoria's mailbox, and turned it into a birdhouse, poetic justice. 3 months later, we hosted the first annual Pine Ridge Victory Day. Over 3,000 residents came. Live music, grilled food, local crafts, kids laughing, elders dancing. The air was light, the valley full of life. Harold Crawford stood at the microphone and raised a toast. To Marcus Thompson, the man who saved a valley, stood up to tyranny, and reminded us all that one cabin can change everything. The crowd erupted in cheers. We even held a mock Karen contest. Contestants dressed as stereotypical HOA enforcers, measuring grass and yelling about mailbox color codes. It was ridiculous. It was healing. It was perfect. The final entry of the night was an elderly woman in pearls holding a megaphone. She shouted, "You can't grow tomatoes. They're offensive to property values." Everyone laughed so hard they cried. And just like that, our trauma became memory. Our wounds became roots. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had once been fined $500 for a decorative garden gnome, now led the new Creative Home Beautification Committee, with 0 restrictions and full community input. Sophie finally joined her science club, with help from the new education fund, and won first place at the state fair for her project on sustainable community planning. She dedicated it to her mom, and to a man who taught her that legacy means protecting the land and the people on it, Harold Crawford. Began writing a book. A memoir of sorts. Working title: The HOA That Messed with the Wrong Cabin. I told him to make sure to include the part where Victoria tried to run me over with a bulldozer. He laughed. That's the first chapter. But the final chapter wasn't mine to write. Pine Ridge had become something more than a battle site. It had become a blueprint, a map for communities everywhere who were tired of living in fear of people who confused control with leadership. And that, more than land or legacy, was the greatest victory of all. It was over. Or at least, it should have been. Victoria Sterling was gone. Her mansion bulldozed. Her empire burned to the ground by truth and sunlight. Richard had rolled over. The 47 loyalists had either fled Pine Ridge or were paying quadruple lease rates in silence. And yet, the land didn't feel quiet. Not yet. Because late one night, after the crowds had gone home and the laughter from Victory Day had faded into memory, I got one final message. An email. Subject line: The real owner of Pine Ridge. No name. No signature. Just an attachment. A scan of an old document. I stared at it for a long time before I opened it. It was a deed. Dated 1928, at first glance. It looked real. Official. state sealed. The language was old but unmistakable. It claimed the original land sale hadn't gone to Thomas Thompson, my great-grandfather, but to a company called Mountain Horizon Holdings, LLC. For a moment, my blood turned cold. Had everything been a lie? Was my grandfather not the original owner? Was Pine Ridge not mine? I called Elena immediately. She was at the cabin within an hour, her laptop already open, the glow from the screen catching her worried expression. Together, we pored over every line, every signature, every timestamp. "This is fake," she finally said, tapping one corner of the document. "Look at the notary seal. The date style wasn't even used in Colorado until 1941. She zoomed in on the header. Mountain Horizon Holdings didn't exist in 1928. It was registered in Nevada in 2006. A forged deed, a desperate bluff. Victoria's final gambit. She had sent it from prison. Or more likely, through someone on the outside. Maybe a loyalist. Maybe just her last dying scream into the void. I should have felt angry. But instead, I felt a strange, quiet pity. Even in federal custody, Victoria couldn't stop trying to win. She couldn't stop clawing at a crown that had already been melted down into dust. She'd lost everything, but she still couldn't let go of control. That night, as Elena left, she paused at the door and said, "It's never been about just land to her, Marcus. It's been about identity. She doesn't know who she is without authority." I nodded, but my thoughts were far away. Because the more I sat with it, the more I realized something. This fight, this war she started, had never really been about me either. It was about everyone else. The thousands of people trapped in similar situations. The families forced into bankruptcy by fake HOA fines. The elderly tricked into signing away their savings. The single moms like Emma, silenced and scared. It was about all the people who didn't have a grandfather who built cabins by hand and buried legal weapons in rusted boxes for them to one day use. I did, and that meant I had a responsibility most didn't. So I made a choice. I went national. It started with an op-ed titled, "When HOAs Turn Hostile, and the Cabin That Fought Back." It went viral in less than 24 hours. Then came the interviews. NBC, CNN, a feature in The Atlantic. HOA reform groups started citing Pine Ridge as a cautionary tale. HOA watchdog nonprofits began using the Sterling collapse as a case study. And then the letters poured in. Thousands, from Arizona to Alabama. From veterans to newlyweds. People who had been fined for wind chimes, for children's toys on porches, for paint that was too cheerful. Stories of heartbreak. Stories of bullying. Stories that all had the same root, abuse of power under the guise of property values. Emma and I read them together over coffee every morning. One woman wrote, "They fined me for putting up a small garden for my autistic son, said it was visually disruptive. You gave me hope." A man from Florida said, "They tried to take my house because I missed one payment while I was in the hospital. You showed me it's possible to fight back." The more I read, the more I felt the weight settle into my chest. This wasn't just my story anymore, so I expanded the HOA Abuse Victims Fund, turning it from a local program into a national foundation. We hired lawyers, advocates, real estate experts. We built an anonymous hotline. Within 6 weeks, over 2,000 people reached out. Emma became the face of the outreach wing. Elena led legal coordination. Harold helped publish a free resource guide. Know Your HOA Rights. And me? I went back to the cabin, back to the porch, back to where it all began. Only now, the view was different. The land was no longer just a secret. My grandfather had protected. It was a platform, a promise. The Thomas Thompson Conservation Area welcomed its first wave of school trips and nature volunteers that month. Rangers led kids through the trails, teaching them about pine ecology, native grasses, water protection. I was there the day Sophie Brooks stood at the front of her class and explained how her mom had saved a community from a corrupt queen. "Want to be like her when I grow up?" she said, chin lifted with pride. She didn't run away. She fought. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. That night, Emma and I sat on the porch again. 2 mugs of cocoa, 1 dog curled at our feet. I don't think I ever said thank you. I told her quietly. She smiled. For what? For trusting me. For standing up when it could have cost you everything. She looked out across the trees. I didn't do it for you, she said. I did it for Sophie. For all the kids who deserve to grow up without fear. Then she looked back at me, eyes shining. But I'm glad it was you I stood with. We sat in silence for a while, watching the wind shift through the valley. In the distance, floodlights lit up the empty lot where Victoria's mansion had once stood. Now, it was a clearing, a space where nothing ugly could hide anymore. Pine Ridge had changed, and it had changed me. I wasn't just a man who fought to save a cabin. I was someone who had inherited a responsibility, not just to protect the land, but to protect the people who depended on it. As the stars broke through the clouds, I found myself whispering something into the wind. Grandpa, I hope I made you proud. The wind didn't answer, but deep in my bones, I felt it. He was listening. I used to think the battle was over, that once the truth came out, once Victoria and Richard were in prison and the community stood together again, there'd be peace, justice, healing. But I've learned something since then. Justice isn't clean. It isn't linear. It doesn't always look like a gavel slamming down or a villain being dragged away. Sometimes, justice looks like forgiveness. And sometimes it looks like a knife in the back, held by someone you thought you could trust. It started with a letter, mailed, no return address. The handwriting shaky. Inside was a photo, Emma, sitting at a table across from Richard Sterling in what looked like a diner booth, her eyes wide. His hand on a file folder. The message scribbled underneath in block letters. Some heroes have secrets. 2. I froze. It didn't make sense. Emma had helped bring him down. She'd gathered the documents, played double agent, risked her job, her safety, everything. Why would she meet with Richard? I didn't want to believe it. Couldn't. So I didn't say anything. Not right away. But it lingered, like smoke under a door. I started noticing things I hadn't before. Emma avoiding eye contact during meetings, slipping out early. The way her voice trembled whenever the topic of restitution checks came up, especially when they involved old HOA board members. And then there was the fund, the National HOA Abuse Victims Fund. Our pride, our lifeline, our shield. Elena called me one morning, her voice tight. Marcus, we have a problem. A $200,000 disbursement just got flagged. The recipient's name is fake. The address traces back to a P.O. box in Las Vegas. I sat up in bed. What are you saying? I'm saying someone's laundering money through our program. And they're smart. They're routing it through shell companies. One of them is called S&B Advocacy. Sound familiar? I blinked. Sterling and Brooks. Elena didn't speak. She didn't have to. It hit me like a gut punch. Emma's last name. And the name of Victoria's now defunct landscaping front. I told myself it had to be a coincidence. Maybe Emma was being blackmailed. Maybe someone had used her name. I needed to believe that, because the alternative, that the woman who had helped save my life had been quietly siphoning funds in the background, was unbearable. But I had to know. So I confronted her. We met at the rebuilt cabin. The same porch where Sophie had once asked about legacy and justice. She sat down slowly, like she already knew why I'd called her. I showed her the photo, the letter, the disbursement records. She didn't deny it, didn't cry, didn't even flinch. I never took anything for myself, she said softly. Not a cent. I met with Richard once, just once. He offered me a deal to stay quiet, to let the investigation stall. I said no. Then why the fake disbursements? Her eyes welled up. Because there were people who needed help, real people. Single moms, veterans, elderly couples who didn't have paperwork or proper addresses. I routed the funds through aliases so they wouldn't be denied by our system. I stared at her. Why didn't you just tell me? Because I knew what it would look like. And I was afraid. Afraid you'd stop trusting me. Afraid you'd think I was like them. She looked away. I'm not. I wanted to believe her. Every part of me did. But trust once cracked doesn't fit back together the same way. I asked her to step down from her role. She nodded, said nothing, just took off her lanyard, handed me the keys to the HOA office, and walked away, shoulders straight, back stiff. Sophie didn't say goodbye. The next day, the office was empty. Her desk cleared. Her name removed from the website. It felt like losing a friend. No. It felt like losing something even deeper. A future I had begun to believe in. That night, I stood alone in the garden she had helped build. The tomatoes were in bloom. Mrs. Rodriguez, who used to be fined for her gnome, now tended the flowers quietly nearby. "People make mistakes," she said without looking at me. "Sometimes good people. Doesn't mean they're evil, just means they're human." I nodded, but the ache in my chest didn't fade, especially not when Sophie showed up the next day with a note. "My mom never stole anything. She just tried too hard to help people who didn't fit your system. You made her feel like Victoria." I read it twice, and then folded it slowly. The irony cut deep, because that was the line I had sworn never to cross, the one between justice and control, between protection and punishment. And somehow, I'd landed dangerously close to the wrong side. Elena stood by my decision. "You did what you had to," she said. "You can't build a legacy on blurred lines." But Harold was less certain. "I watched Emma," he said, sipping tea on the cabin porch. "She fought for this place harder than anyone. I don't think she did anything for herself. I think she just didn't want the red tape to crush the wrong people." He looked at me carefully. "You're not Victoria, Marcus, but be careful. Justice without mercy becomes something else." The words stuck with me. Longer than I expected, so I started digging. And what I found broke me. Emma had indeed used alias companies, but every disbursement tied to a real person. A disabled vet in Ohio, a widowed teacher in Oregon, a father of 3 in rural Kansas whose HOA had tried to fine him for parking his truck in his own driveway. Every name had a story. Every story had pain. Emma hadn't stolen. She had simply tried to work around a system not built for the people it claimed to help. My system. And in punishing her, I'd become the thing I hated most. So I did something I never thought I would. I went to her. She was living quietly now, outside of Pine Ridge, working at a small legal clinic in a neighboring town. When I walked into the reception area, she didn't look surprised. "Here to fire me again?" she said dryly. I shook my head. I came to say, I was wrong. Silence. I let fear guide my decision. Fear of being betrayed again. Fear of repeating history. I forgot what this was supposed to be about. She looked at me for a long time, then nodded. "I'm not coming back, Marcus. Not officially. I found something good here." "I understand," I said, "but if you ever build something that doesn't punish people for trying to help the forgotten," her voice cracked, "call me." I promised I would. Back in Pine Ridge, the sun was setting over the conservation trails. Sophie's science project about community sustainability had just won a national prize. I watched her run across the field, her arms wide like wings, laughing in the golden light. In that moment, I realized something. Legacy isn't about never making mistakes. It's about choosing to own them when you do. It's about forgiving others and yourself, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. I thought the storm had passed. After Emma left, I tried to settle into something like peace. The cabin was quiet again. The garden had bloomed. Sophie had won her award, and the Conservation Trust was gaining national momentum. But just when the dust seemed to finally settle, it shifted, and something new began to crawl out from beneath it. It started with a phone call from Harold. "Marcus," he said, voice low and urgent. "I think you need to see something. Meet me at the archive shed, the one behind the old Pine Ridge Chapel." That shed hadn't been touched in decades. It was where old HOA records went to die, back when things were still done on paper. Drove over immediately. Harold stood at the door with a metal crowbar in hand. "I had to break the lock," he said. It was rusted shut. Inside, the air smelled like dust, mildew, and forgotten power. We spent hours combing through cracked file boxes, yellowed documents, brittle folders labeled in Sharpie. 1940s. Budget, early settler disputes, HOA expansion, 1981, and then we found it. A single brown envelope. On the front, Sterling Amendment, confidential, 1989. Inside was a 3-page document, typewritten, signed by 2 names, Catherine Sterling, Victoria's mother, Judge Emmett Davidson, the same man who'd tried to issue an arrest warrant against me earlier in the story. The contents were horrifying. The Sterling Amendment was a secret clause, unofficial, never registered with the county, but referenced in dozens of private HOA contracts for high-value residents. It stated, upon expiration of the Pine Ridge lease in 2028, any and all rights of structural ownership shall revert to the most senior standing HOA board member, provided the Thompson lineage has failed to demonstrate active managerial use of the land within a continuous 5-year window. I read it 3 times. Harold looked at me, jaw tight. They knew, even 40 years ago. They knew that if your family disappeared, they could take everything. My stomach dropped. I've been here, I said. I rebuilt the cabin. I started the trust. That's proof of active use. Yes, Harold said, but they've been trying to erase that proof since day one. The inspections, the vandalism, the smear campaigns, the forged documents. It all made sense now. Victoria hadn't just wanted the cabin gone out of spite. She wanted to create legal precedent, evidence that the Thompsons had abandoned the land, that I was just a relic, a trespasser, and if she could do that before 2028, this entire valley, the homes, the forests, the trails, would transfer to the Sterling Family Trust under a secret legal trick buried beneath 4 decades of dirt. She hadn't been acting alone. This wasn't just a HOA gone rogue. This was a coordinated generational plan, and she wasn't the last piece. I called Elena immediately. She met us at the archive shed and pored over the document with gloves and a flashlight. Her jaw tightened as she scanned the judge's signature. This isn't just shady, she said. This is actionable fraud. If we can prove Davidson knowingly used his office to suppress ownership rights, we can bring federal charges. Is he still active? I asked. Harold nodded grimly. Semi-retired, but still sits on boards, still has friends, still has power. Suddenly, it all clicked into place. The false arrest warrant he issued, the pressure on local media to suppress coverage, the development deal Victoria bragged about, tied to Wellington Corporation, whose CEO just happened to be Davidson's nephew. They weren't trying to steal the land. They had already made plans to own it after I failed. They were just waiting me out. And now, with Victoria behind bars, Davidson had stepped into the shadows she left behind, smiling, civil, wearing a judge's robe while holding a dagger beneath the table. Elena found something else that night, a series of financial transfers. Quiet, subtle, from shell companies back to a private legal fund called the Davidson Civic Reserve. Translation? I asked. Elena didn't blink. He's still paying people, still laundering, still working on Plan B. And then, another letter arrived. This time, it wasn't anonymous. It came in an embossed envelope marked Davidson and Park Legal Chambers. Inside, a single page. No threats, no accusations, just a statement. We understand your position as successor to the Thompson estate. However, in the interest of community stability, the Davidson board will be assuming transitional leadership of Pine Ridge operations beginning Q2 2026. Please prepare all documentation accordingly. Resistance will be interpreted as breach of land use continuity. I stared at the words like they were poison. It wasn't even a legal notice. It was a warning. They were coming for it all. Not with bulldozers this time, but with courtrooms and quiet paperwork. This was how old money worked, not through violence. Through process, through patience, through the illusion of law. I wanted to burn the letter. Instead, I called an emergency meeting of the Pine Ridge Community Board. Residents flooded into the hall, many of them now loyal, trusting, but all of them visibly shaken when I read the Sterling Amendment aloud. They want to erase everything we've built, I said. Everything your kids are growing up with. Everything we fought for. Someone in the back stood. It was Mrs. Davidson. Yes, that Davidson, the wife of the judge. She looked tired, wrinkled, but her voice didn't shake. I never supported what Victoria did, she said. But my husband, he believes the land was always meant to be under order, not chaos. He thinks you've destabilized the system. I stared at her. Order built on fear isn't stability, I said. It's tyranny. Another voice rose. Mr. Chen, the elderly man Victoria had tricked into signing away thousands in fees. I support Marcus, he said firmly. He protected us. He made us whole. I'll stand against Davidson. A wave of agreement spread through the room. But I saw the fear too. People were tired. They didn't want another legal war. Another round of lawyers and unknowns. Davidson was betting on that. He was betting that we'd be too weary to fight again. And he might have been right, until Sophie stood up. She walked to the front of the room, small, confident, holding a single sheet of paper in her hand. My mom wrote this before we left, she said. She said if things ever got bad again, I should read it. She unfolded the note and read aloud. They will try again. People like Victoria never disappear. They just change names. But power only works when good people go quiet. When we whisper instead of shout. When we say, that's not my problem. Marcus gave me my voice back. And it's our job to use it. For the next mom, the next kid, the next neighbor who feels afraid to plant a flower in their own yard. Silence filled the room. Then, applause. Thunderous, relieved, united. The board voted unanimously. No cooperation with Davidson. All Sterling contracts officially nullified, and a motion passed to begin legal countermeasures through the Thompson Trust. As the meeting ended, I walked outside into the cool night air. The valley was still, peaceful, but I knew now. It was fragile peace, and Davidson wouldn't stop. Not until the final clause was destroyed. Not until every trap left by the Sterlings was dismantled. Not until I proved that this land, this legacy, wasn't just paperwork and property. It was people, and I'd protect them, no matter what came next. The courtroom smelled like old wood and colder promises. It had taken nearly 7 months to get here, through injunctions, appeals, and every legal trick Davidson's people could throw at us. But now, the battle for Pine Ridge's future came down to a single hearing, in a county courthouse with a crooked ceiling fan and a judge who had once called me a disruptive influence on neighborhood order. That judge, Emmett Davidson. Yes, he had recused himself officially, publicly, but behind the scenes he still pulled strings, advising a newly formed transition board and pushing false narratives through his old contacts in the press. He wasn't sitting on the bench, but he was everywhere else. His fingerprints were all over the court filings, all over the attacks against me, and all over the final legal grenade that landed in my lap the week before trial. A motion filed quietly in the middle of the night, claiming that I had violated the 5-year active stewardship clause by failing to maintain consistent physical residence on the land. It was laughable. I'd spent more nights in that cabin than anywhere else over the past 2 years, but Davidson had documentation, doctored photos, falsified reports, sworn statements from HOA loyalists claiming they'd seen the cabin empty for extended periods, and one of the statements came from someone I never expected, Elena. I stared at her name on the affidavit for what felt like an hour. It didn't make sense. She'd been my rock, my legal firepower, my closest ally. But there it was. Her signature, her words. To my knowledge, Mr. Thompson has not used the cabin as a consistent residence over the past 18 months. In my professional opinion, this may constitute grounds for triggering the Sterling Amendment Clause. I didn't believe it. I called her. She didn't answer. I drove to her office. The door was locked. Empty. Cleared out. Gone. She'd vanished without a word. That night, I stood on the porch of my grandfather's cabin with Harold and Sophie. The fire was crackling. My hands trembled around the mug of coffee. She was working with Davidson? I whispered. Harold shook his head. No, I don't believe that. There's something we're not seeing. Sophie was quiet for a long time before saying, "My mom always said." The loudest lies hide behind the quietest truths. I didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But I would. The day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, residents, lawyers from 3 states. Davidson wasn't on the bench, but his influence was thick in the air. They had called their final witness, a land use expert who conveniently supported their claim that I had abandoned managerial responsibility. I was losing. Then, the back doors creaked open, and in walked Emma. She looked different, tired, but determined, and she was holding something in her hand, a hard drive. She walked straight to my legal team and whispered something to our new attorney. Seconds later, our lawyer stood and said, "Your Honor, we have new evidence to introduce under emergency review, submitted by a former community board member and whistleblower." The judge allowed it. The lights dimmed, and on the screen appeared Elena, a video recording, time-stamped just a week before she disappeared. "My name is Elena Rodriguez," she said, her voice shaky. "If you're watching this, it means I've been compromised. Judge Davidson approached me with a threat. Release a false affidavit or lose my license, my career, everything. He had access to sealed records. He said he'd ruin my life." She swallowed. "I signed the statement, but I also recorded every call, every email. It's all here." The screen flickered through audio clips. Davidson's voice clearly instructing her on what to say, how to phrase it, promising her protection if she just played along. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, shouts. Davidson, watching from the gallery, stood and stormed out. He never came back. Within 48 hours, he was disbarred and arrested on charges of witness tampering, obstruction, and racketeering. The judge overseeing the case slammed the gavel with finality. The Sterling Amendment is nullified. The land and all rights revert fully to Marcus Thompson. Effective immediately, this case is closed. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just sat back in my chair and breathed, not for myself, but for every person who had ever been silenced by a system designed to break them down in silence. Back at Pine Ridge, the news spread fast. They held a spontaneous celebration in the community garden. Fireworks, lanterns, music from local bands. Kids danced barefoot on the grass. Grandparents hugged each other through tears. And then someone tapped me on the shoulder. "Emma." She held out an envelope. "Elena sent this to me before she vanished," she said. "Said it was meant for you." I opened it on the porch that night. Inside was a single sentence, handwritten in blue ink. "Justice without sacrifice is just strategy. You were never a strategist, Marcus. You were always a builder." That broke me. I wept for the first time in months, not because of pain, but because I finally knew it was done. The fight, the fear, the ghosts of Victoria, of Richard, of Davidson. All of it was gone, and in its place, legacy. We officially renamed the valley the Thompson Brooks Reserve, to honor Emma and her unshakable courage. We created a scholarship in Elena's name, for law students who wanted to fight HOA abuse and protect land rights for the next generation, and we installed a new plaque at the entrance of Pine Ridge. This land belongs to those who protect it, not to those who control it. As for the 47, many had long since moved away. Some sent apology letters, others vanished into the background, silenced not by punishment, but by the weight of their own shame. And the cabin still stands, strong, rebuilt, sacred. I live there full-time now. No more legal wars, no more secret amendments, just me, the trees, the wind, and the ghost of a man who once said, "Land isn't just dirt, it's responsibility." Sometimes on quiet nights, I think, I hear his voice in the walls, a whisper, a reminder, and every so often I get letters from strangers, people who watch the story online, people who were scared. They write, "You gave me courage. You made me believe again. You helped me plant tomatoes." And I write back. Every single one, because this land isn't mine. It's ours. And now it's finally safe.